Hello Internet, I'm Jackie Fox, and this video is a second part to a video that I released about what is going on at the Ocilla, Georgia ICE Detention Center. What I want to do with this video is to open the question, show you firsthand accounts, and get those investigated. I want to raise the profile of this so that we know what we're looking for and we know who to ask and where to look. Previously on Fox Talks.
You have detained women. I had several detained women on numerous occasions that would come to me and say, Miss Wooten, I had a hysterectomy. Why? I had no answers as to why.
I am today on location here in Irwin County, Georgia. I am pretty close to the Ocilla Detention Center that many of you have heard about on the news. The doctor in question is Mahendra Amin, a doctor whom we're really going to get into later, but for right now I'm just going to tell you what's in this AP report. Let's talk about that particular article and what we know. The woman in question was experiencing an irregular menstrual cycle and was told to have a D&C. When she woke up from the surgery, though, she found out that one of her two fallopian tubes had been removed. The medical records here indicate that, as a part of the procedure, Amin discovered that the tube was swollen. She said that he told her, quote, "The reply that he gave was that they were in there anyways and found there was this problem." There's a couple issues with this story. This is just one of the many examples that was laid out in the AP article, which I encourage you to read and I will link to in the description. The problems in this particular case are that, for one, there's no possibility of consent here because the problem that was ultimately acted on was found while the patient was unconscious. And it was also acted on while she was unconscious, giving her literally no opportunity to provide consent. Furthermore, a procedure like this doesn't involve an examination of the fallopian tubes, so how did he even discover the problem to begin with? And finally, just because you find a problem in an exploratory operation like this doesn't mean that you act on it without consent. In fact, this is a pretty big no-no within the medical field, but this is really just characteristic of who Dr. Amin is as a person. If you haven't seen that first one, it's not super required, but there are a lot of elements that get set up in there that will help you understand how a lot of the stories here relate. But instead of focusing on what has been said in the media, I'm going to focus instead on what was said at the protest, which is something that a lot of people aren't aware of. And kind of some stuff that I find to be even more personally disturbing than what is being widely reported in the news. A couple of things, this was a really expensive video for me to make compared to a lot of the stuff that I usually do on this channel, mainly because of the travel costs involved in actually showing up and doing this. So if you could send me some money on coffee, there's going to be links towards the end of the video for you to do so. Also, if you like any of the original footage here, if you want to raise the profile of this story and share some of that, I would be happy to let you. I'm not gonna hit you with a copyright notice or anything. I'm not that kind of person. So go ahead, freely use any of the footage that you find here. I'm also going to provide links to where you can find more raw footage from the protest. I would highly encourage you to make your own videos about this and share this story, because really the goal here is to raise the profile and raise awareness about this doctor and what he's doing and how it's actually even more widespread than the media is reporting. One more thing that I hit on in the original video that's going to come up in this video and seems to be a big pattern with this doctor is that he often either just destroys paperwork to cover up for himself, or he straight up doesn't do it to begin with. In either case, the patients can't access the paperwork after the fact whenever something comes up that is questionable. If you saw the previous video and you thought that what I laid out in that article was disturbing, it's only going to get much worse as we dive down the rabbit hole and start to realize that Dr. Amin doesn't just perform gynecological practices at this facility. He is a doctor and he operates outside of this facility, and the things that he was doing inside of the facility actually seem really similar to the things that he does in his regular practice with other American citizens. So the problem here is actually a lot more widespread than the media is reporting. Though I guess that isn't as sensational as trying to push a eugenics narrative. And I really question if that was exactly the motivation. If anything, he just seems to be a really shitty doctor, and the big part of the story here for me is that the private facility that was hiring him doesn't seem to give a damn about the people inside, and this is a problem that's not isolated to this one facility by a long shot. This seems to be a problem that's endemic to the private prison industry. So before we go any further, I want you to understand that I'm putting a big content warning here because the things that we're going to talk about are really disturbing violations of human rights. And while I'm only going to show you 2 or 3 specific examples within this video, understand that this is a much more widespread problem than is being reported. But let's talk a little bit about the protest before we get into some of the footage. There were anywhere between maybe 100 to 150, maybe even 200 people that attended from all over the country. Most of those people, though, were from Georgia, although there were at least 5 or 6 other states that attended. When we did our main action as a part of this protest, there were about 50 cars that operated in a caravan and maybe another 50 person walking alongside them. Our goal here not only was to raise the profile of this case, which is basically the purpose of all protests, but also very specifically to make a lot of noise and to be heard by the prisoners inside of the facility. We definitely wanted them to know that we were on their side and that someone on the outside cared about them, because it's gotta be crushing to feel like you have no control over your life, and I hope that it provided them some sense of relief that people on the outside really cared about them.
See, I'm going to be using some of the live stream. I'm going to be getting a little bit of footage myself, but, you know, obviously there are people with better cameras, hopefully, doing the live streaming. So I'm going to try to, you know, focus more on that and get you the better quality video that I have the option of getting you. Over the course of the protest, I returned to my car several times to get a more noise-isolated place to record, because even if they weren't being loud, just having 200 people around you is not good for audio recording. But I realized that a lot of that information is actually redundant, so I'm going to relay some of that information to you here that was actually kind of relevant. So for a little while, once the protest really got kicked off, once the caravan started to move, I started hearing gunshots pretty regularly coming from a location behind where the police were kind of camped out at the end of the road near me. Eventually, someone from the group went and talked to a farmer who was farming the land across the street from us. And we found out that these gunshots were actually coming from duck hunters, and it wasn't something we should be concerned about. You have to kind of question why these particular duck hunters happen to be hunting ducks right there that day, but I don't want to get too conspiratorial and think that they were trying to intimidate us, but it's possible. There was also a time when we heard that a group the organizers didn't say very much about the group, but they were organizing up the road. I don't know if that was police or counter-protesters, but they were concerned. They wanted us to stay in our cars for a while, and that's when we started the caravan, so that we would at least have like the safety of our vehicles if things started to get ugly. But that also calmed down pretty well, and I'm going to give you some thoughts on why towards the end of the video, but for right now, that really relays all of the information that was missing from those moments of video in which I talked about other things that, honestly, the live footage that I'm about to show you is going to cover even better. I did want to speak as a part of the guest speakers while they were doing the live streaming, but I kept waiting and letting other people and locals that had more personal stories speak instead. So I'm going to tell you what I had planned to say, because we ended up going over time and I couldn't even get 1 minute to be able to say this. But it's important to put this stuff in a historical context. People who are watching this video probably already realize how serious things like eugenics are, and perhaps know a good bit about the history of it. But for those of you who don't, there's a very whitewashed American history of eugenics that is really important to note. And that is that eugenics started in the late 1800s in America. This is kind of a post-Civil War development that kind of came up along Jim Crow as the awful racists within our country were trying to find ways to justify their racism, essentially. We also had things like phrenology, which is a pseudoscience of the time that was used to justify racism, pop up around the same time. That got imported to the UK, and then doctors from America and the UK went to Germany and taught them what we knew, because they were very interested in this eugenics idea, and well, we all know where that went. But when we think about eugenics, we tend to think only about the Nazis. We don't think about the fact that it started here in America, and it started in really America and the UK. And we also like to think, another mistake is to think that eugenics ended with the Holocaust, and it didn't. I don't know about the rest of America. I know a lot of places ended this, but there were, I want to say 32 or 33 different states that had some form of eugenics program in America at some point in the 20th century. And for my home state, North Carolina, I know we didn't end our program until 1977, which is absolutely appalling, and something I didn't find out until years into college. It was never taught to us before then. And I never thought, when I heard that I would hear a story of someone who knew someone who was personally affected. But when I told my mother about this, she said, yeah, I knew about that. She had a friend growing up who, she had a child out of wedlock when she was around 16, and her family wasn't happy about it, so they sent her away, and the facility that they sent her to determined that she was some degree of mentally deficient, and that was the only explanation for her having a child out of wedlock that young, because it's the Bible Belt, and it was still very conservative. I mean, it's still pretty conservative now from things that we see, but it was still very conservative at the time, and they used this logic to perform a hysterectomy on her so that she wouldn't be able to pass on her what they considered to be deficient genes. And I never thought, even then, that I would meet people who had had similar experiences as a part of my life. But on the day of the protest, that changed.
So everything ended at around 3:30. We only had the space until 3, apparently. It's about 5 o'clock now. Boy, after that experience, the first thing I wanted to do when I found out that there wasn't going to be anything happening over the next couple of days or before I have class again was get the fuck out of Irwin County. And you're going to see why. First up, I'm going to show you a woman who has had personal experiences and has known several people has had personal experiences with this Dr. Amin. That is the Uterus Collector that we hear about on the news. So let's go to her.
Now we have Brittany with Ocilla. She wants to tell us about her experience with this doctor and how we should believe this women.
I'm very sorry, I'm going to get real dirty, real quick. So I've got two stories to tell you real quick. I've got my own, I'll tell it last. I'm going to get emotional. And I have another woman who told me her story yesterday. I was on the phone with her for over 2 hours. The end of her story is going to get real familiar. So, my friends will obviously listen to them and I can see what happens to people around here speak out. She first started using Dr. Amin when she was 14 years old. She was having really heavy cycles. We told her, you don't get pregnant early, you're not going to get pregnant. So, at 17, he performed his first surgery on her. He says she has cervical cancer. She doesn't have evidence. He has no idea. Maybe she did it for the money, maybe she did. No proof that she actually did. At 20, she got pregnant for the first time. Very first appointment she went to, she was 18 weeks. He told her her child had Down syndrome. And that's close. That's a problem child. You're too young to deal with that. You need to abort this baby. She says no. She refuses. He tells her again, you're too young. You need to abort this baby. So she gets in her car and she drives to Macon. Miraculously, she gets to Macon and the baby's fine. There's no signs of Down syndrome. Man was ready. She saved the life of her 18-week-old daughter before she was even born. She got to, she carried her baby full term. He induced her. She has no idea why. Anybody that's ever used Dr. Amin, that's his thing. What he can induce, he owns the hospital. Surprise, the baby doesn't want to come out. You have a C-section, money in his pocket. You didn't tell her. Fortunately for her, she did not have to have a C-section this day, but she was very confused as to why he induced her 3 weeks early when her baby wasn't ready to come out. Her story didn't end like mine. Her baby was fine. She had another baby. She used Dr. Amin again. The pregnancy was fine. 16 weeks, she started going to preterm labor. They stopped it. Again, they took her baby at 35 weeks. The nurse accidentally unplugged her epidural and left her catheter in. She was 10 centimeters dilated, and the nurse finally decided to take out her catheter. She has the baby. She comes back in, she's bleeding again, heavy cycles. Dr. Amin says, okay, we need to do a hysterectomy. She stays in the hospital for 3 days. He sends her home with pain pills. She starts bleeding. She comes back to the hospital and he says, this is normal. Here's some more pain pills. The uterus is not normal. She goes home. She gets 103 fever. She comes back to the hospital. He says, you have the swine flu. Gives her more pain pills and sends her home. Her dad walks in. She's almost lifeless in her living room. She's got 103 fever. She's bleeding. She's got discharge, and she said, I smell like I'm dying. Her dad picks her up and takes her to the hospital in Macon County. She has sepsis. When he cut her from hip to hip to take out her uterus, he cut a hole in her intestines and sewed them up and sent her home. She was dying. They removed 1 foot of her uterus, of her intestines that day. And in the next 5 years, she had to have 13 follow-up surgeries. She got addicted to pain pills because every time she went in there, he gave her more pain pills. She could not parent her children for weeks at a time because she was on pain pills and barely living. She has problems moving now. She's $450,000 in debt. So she gets a lawyer and she sues. They tell her you have a multi-million-dollar case. They go to pull up her medical records. She was surprised to find out that Irwin County Hospital has no record of her hysterectomy. The paperwork is gone. The paper she signed saying that she was not going to sue them was forged. Her last name was wrong. She did not sign that paper. She has no recollection of ever seeing that paper before, and now there's no record other than a scar from hip to hip and 13 surgeries telling her that she had hysterectomy. There's no evidence. So yes, it is possible for that monster to perform hysterectomy and it not be on paper. This woman is white. She had insurance. So what do you think they're doing to those women? Now I'm going to tell you my story. I was 18 years old. I have no mother, no grandmother, no aunt, no one to help me. So I thought the routine pelvic exams that he managed to do at every single visit were normal. I thought this man and his nurses telling me undress from the waist down at every single visit, I thought it was normal. I have 6 children and a big pelvic. It's not normal. Everything was fine in the 32 weeks I started going into preterm labor. I went back to the doctor. Every visit I've ever went on with that man, I had 5 minutes. He sees all the patients in Irwin and in Hill on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and that's it. You get 5 minutes with him, or you're out the door. His equipment was so outdated, and I know he's making plenty of money, so it's not going back to the facility. His equipment was so outdated that I only ever got ultrasounds at the top of my child's head. And he walked in, did the pelvic exam, did a half-second picture of her, and went out the door. So we all know I was really in there. 32 weeks, I go into preterm labor, and I feel like I'm dying. I sit down, I go to the hospital, they keep me there for a week. They said, we found fluid on your baby's lungs. We don't know why. Dr. Amin walked in and said, it's probably meconium. She'll be fine, but I'm sending you to the specialist. When I walked in to see the doctor for the first time, I sat down on the bed and did the ultrasound. It's the first time I got to see my daughter's face. The doctor walked in, he had a nurse behind him, and she had tissue. She did it right then. And he said, I'm very sorry, but there's nothing we can do. Your daughter is pregnant. What Dr. Amin neglected to tell me is that I was already negative and my daughter was already positive. One shot would have saved her life. One shot. And that was it. And in 5 days, instead of celebrating my daughter's 11th birthday, I'll be taking flowers and balloons to her grave. This man is evil. He hurts women. He causes them unnecessary pain and suffering. He takes away their family members. And he takes away their ability to have children. We cannot let him continue to be who these women seek every day for help. He's not helping them. He's getting money in his pocket and he's taking their future. These women are not criminals. They're moms and they're aunts. I know I would move hell and high water to do whatever it took to make sure that my kids got to school, to make sure that they got a good education. I would do whatever it took, and that's all they're trying to do. They're trying to make it better for their families and for their children, and they think we're arrested and put in cages like animals. We cannot let this continue for them.
I'm really sorry about that audio quality. I didn't expect it to be that horrible. Even though the megaphone was a bit iffy for us too, I do remember being able to hear her at least well enough that I got the story, so I'm gonna be filling in the blanks from memory. Her first story is from a woman who she knows, who could not be there or didn't want to be there, and she had taken a bunch of notes on her phone. That's why you see her looking at her phone throughout that story. So her first experience with the doctor, she's pretty far along in her pregnancy. The doctor tells her that the child has Down syndrome, and he encourages her to get an abortion. He bothers her about getting an abortion for a while. She decides not to do it. Instead, she goes to a hospital in Macon, Georgia instead, and they tell her that the child doesn't have Down syndrome. She comes back, and finding out that he gave her a false diagnosis and encouraged her to get an abortion for no clear reason whatsoever. The main story beats here are, she goes to have the child. He wants to induce her 6 weeks early for no real reason whatsoever that anyone can discern. And they try to chemically induce her. They have all sorts of complications trying to do this. It doesn't work. So he instead decides to go for a C-section, which they believe is basically just for the profit of it. So, and honestly, this is a pattern with a lot of hospitals. They do the C-sections because it makes them more money, even though it puts mothers at much higher risk, and you're about to see why and how. But it's even worse than that. That's just a systemic issue. This story gets worse because she goes back to him because as a part of the C-section, he also removes her uterus. There were some complications apparently, and he felt like it was the thing he needed to do. Does this sound familiar? Anyways, in doing so, something went wrong. Something that we're gonna find out about later. But a few weeks after, she's bleeding pretty heavily, and she's concerned, and he says, oh no, that's normal with a hysterectomy. She waits a little while longer. She ends up with a high fever. She comes back. He does an examination, tells her she has swine flu. And at each of these interactions, he's giving her painkillers. That's all. Nothing for the swine flu, just painkillers. Her father finds her almost dead. She gets taken to the hospital. The hospital tells her that she has sepsis. After a little bit of investigation, they find out that when he had done the C-section and the hysterectomy, he had cut into her intestines and sewed it back up and just not said anything about it. And the whole swine flu thing really seems like a cover-up to me, but, you know, I'm going to stop editorializing. She has 13 more surgeries, becomes addicted to pain pills, unable to take care of her children because of this man's, A, his mistake, and B, him trying to cover it up. And the cherry on top is that when she went to get medical records on this procedure that was done and what happened, there are none. Does any of this sound familiar? And then her story. Her child. There were complications. Fluid on the child's lungs. He says it's nothing to worry about. It's just kind of a common complication. It'll sort itself out. But she does worry. She gets a second opinion. She finds out that the child is Rh positive. She's Rh negative. And this is a problem that could have, in her words, been solved with a shot. That's what the hospital told her. But because it wasn't done when she went in with the problem, the child doesn't make it. And apparently he knew this and didn't tell her. His medical neglect cost her her daughter's life. This wasn't the only story like this, but that's a sufficient summary, and this video is already super long, so I'm just going to get on with it.
I also got the interview that I was talking about. So let's hear what he has to say. This is, I mean, I lucked into probably the best source to be able to give me an analysis on exactly what happened the day the news broke and compare that to regular business, other than someone who actually works there. And even our whistleblower was fired before the news broke, so even she wouldn't have witnessed this. So I think what he has to say is very important for understanding this.
You're rolling.
My name's Dayton Klein. I'm a graduate from Irwin County High School here in Ocilla. When I found out about these events, I immediately not immediately, I had to wait for my significant other to get off work, but we immediately came up here when we got the chance. And when we got here, I noticed there was a lot more shuttle buses and transport vans than I've ever seen out here in the 20 years that I've been coming out to this horse arena right next to us.
Yeah.
So you're just to be clear with me and my audience, you know this area and kind of what goes on there and what it's usually like real well.
The time. My mom's been running horses here for, like I said, 20 years. This is how long we've been living in Georgia after we moved down here from Michigan. And I've never seen that much activity or that many vans or shuttle buses in one place. I did find out the day after that one of the victims that had been there for 3 years was being scheduled to be deported. What was the other thing you wanted me to talk
It was
about?
your mom's story, but you don't have to go over that part.
All
really,
right.
what I want to know is what she saw on the inside. What she like firsthand experience of what the conditions are.
First off, what it was is a texting and driving incident. Somebody was coming this way, texting and driving, swerved over into her lane. My mom's on medication. She had a stroke not too long ago. Her brain gets a little fuzzy sometimes. She ended up wrecking her truck into the ditch. She said within just a few minutes, the state trooper pulled up and grabbed her by her face, screaming at her, wanting to know what kind of drugs she was on. Was she on meth? Was she on cocaine? What? Because my mom's missing a couple teeth. Well, people can't afford insurance.
Yeah.
So they charge her on a DUI. And like I said, most of the time you spend the night in the drunk tank, go home the next morning. She even asked him, if I can't get anybody to bail me out, how do I get out of here? And they said, well, you'll get to go home in the morning. She said within the hour, she was over here at the Irwin County Detention Center in not a drunk tank or anything like that. They wanted $3,000 bond, but the conditions on the inside, she said the food was inedible. She said afterward, for 3 or 4 days after she got out of there, that her feces was like concrete trying to come out.
God damn.
She said it was gray. Yeah. So they're obviously not getting the nutrition they need.
Yeah.
They talked about the mats that they get to lay on. She said it was probably about a ½ an inch thick on a steel slab.
Yeah.
You know. And then she had, I believe she said 6 other people in the cell with her. They were all Hispanic or from other countries, so nobody spoke any English. She didn't get a chance to talk to anybody or anything like that. So, but she spent about 3 or 4 days there, and she just...
How big was the cell, would you say? Did she describe that to you?
She never said that.
Okay.
So, but she just, for the next few days, she just did not feel good. I'm assuming from the lack of nutrition, lack of sleep, and stuff like that. But she never said anything personally about any of the guards accosting her or anything like that. It was
And you said she was there for a day. Those are the effects of being there for
almost 2 days, maybe 3.
So that's what it does when you're there for 2 days, and we got people that have been there for years and years and years.
Yeah.
God knows what they're going through.
Exactly. Like I said, that lady that they're wanting to deport, that says she was a victim who had been there for 3 years, and now all of a sudden they want to deport her. So it just doesn't make any sense. And then the way they're running people off the property and stuff like that, it just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
I understand it's public or private property, but we as the public, if we have a concern, we should be able to walk right in that front door and ask questions.
Yeah, I don't care if it's public. I don't care if it's private property. It's a public institution.
You know,
it's a fucking prison. You know.
Like I said about the veterans need to open their eyes to this. That they took an oath against all enemies, foreign and domestic. I never deployed personally. I blew my hip out and I hurt my back 3 months before deployment. So I catch a lot of stuff from that. But what I did do was hundreds of funerals for Marines that died overseas, Marines that died back home. Some of them were 90, 100 years old, but I had to deal with their families in the aftermath of that and see what it did to those families. And they're sending people over to die to these other countries when the same kind of stuff is happening here. It doesn't matter if they're illegal. It doesn't matter if they're a citizen. That's human rights violations. Something like that, if that is really going on, that's mass genocide. You're trying, you're stopping these women from being able to reproduce.
Yep.
You know? So it's crazy to think about, and it makes me very, I don't even know the word, I don't really even want to claim that I graduated from here or anything like that anymore, you know? And then after hearing the stories from this doctor, oh, one thing I did forget, the same doctor did my mom's hysterectomy a few years ago.
Yeah.
And not that we know that it's related or anything, but shortly after she started having seizures and stuff like that, she was her hormones were imbalanced and stuff like that. He never gave her any hormone medicine or anything like that to replace what she had lost from the hysterectomy and stuff like that. And like I said, now she's having strokes and all kinds of other health issues that seem to be related to whatever was going on to begin with. So, but I appreciate your time, man.
Hey, man, thank you. I appreciate your time.
But finally, I want to give some final thoughts. We did not, despite there being a tremendous amount of police, I was so scared that I was just going to get pulled over just for associating with the protest. Luckily, it didn't happen. And I am now well outside of Irwin County, thank God. Thank Marks. Thank whoever you think in times like this. I don't necessarily thank God. It's just, I grew up in the South. That's what we say. Religious or not, that's what we say. And I have some video of this. I didn't get very close. Guns make me very anxious, so I stay away from them. But we had several people there who were medics, probably about 6 medics, and we had somewhere between like 2 and 4 people with big old intimidating rifles. And when the march happened, you can see them in the march footage. When the march happened, they stayed at the end and at the front. So if anyone was trying to infiltrate and start stuff, they had to go by a guy with a real big gun. And when we were stationary afterwards, when we started, when the live stream started at the kind of rally, they took to the road, stayed relatively a good little ways away from us, but they were on either end of the road so that anyone who came near us had to go by them. They didn't stop anybody in the road or do anything antagonistic. They just stood there being intimidating and associating with their medics and just being ready. And the protest was pretty clear that we were associated with Black Lives Matter. It was in our chants, it was on t-shirts, and it was on signs. The police had all the same reasons to attack us that they have had to attack any other peaceful protest that they've attacked recently. And they didn't. As far as I know, there were no real serious interactions with the police. They were everywhere. They were watching us. They were parked on either end of the road, but they stayed away from these guys. And they drove by a couple times. And they were swarming the area. But they never, to my knowledge, really interacted with us. And I think that that's a part of why. And, to a certain degree, I've always been a person who preferred nonviolence, but I do think there's a place for them at protests. I feel weird saying that, but there's also historical, and this gets whitewashed in the American retelling of the life of Martin Luther King, but there's this famous photo that I'm going to put on the screen of MLK surrounded by Black Panthers with big intimidating guns because he got enough death threats. He knew he needed a security detail, and they provided that. And that's probably why he didn't get assassinated with a pistol. They took range because they knew if they got within range of those guys, it was going to be a shootout, and they didn't want that to happen. That's why he got sniped specifically. I think it might be worth bearing that in mind at future protests. I know guns make people uneasy, and there were some people who, they were thinking about de-escalation and nonviolent protests, and they were really upset or perturbed or whatever by these people being there, but I feel like they kept us safe. And there's another instance that I want to relate to you. Another thing that happened. There was a big black truck that pulled by real slowly and tried to interact with some people on the fringes of the crowd. Our National Lawyers Guild guy made sure to get in between that. Because everyone, people around me, we were all very wary of them. They never integrated. They just drove by. They didn't get out of their car. They drove by, they turned around, they crept by again. They were just trying to be intimidating. They had very short cropped hair. Like, you could imagine them being bald, like skinheads, maybe 2 months ago. It hadn't grown out far. It wasn't necessarily a military cut. It was even. It looked like they had recently been literal skinheads. They were, I could see their arms really clearly. They were wearing short sleeves. They were all wearing black and just tatted to hell. Like, way more tatted than my arms are, just full sleeve tattoos. But the thing that I really noticed that told me who they were was their hands. I don't know if you've seen these gloves, they're the ones that, like, they advertise you can punch your way out of a car, punch your way through a windshield. The reinforced steel knuckles. That's what they had on. They came ready to break jaws, break ribs, and cause destruction. But they had to drive by some pretty big guns to get near us. And they never got out of their trucks. And I wish that story ended there. I was pulling out the Rotary Club that I originally started filming at. I pulled in there to get my GPS straight. And guess who I saw talking to the state police? Yeah. Now, read into this only as much as seems logical to you. But given what we've seen, given their seeming willingness to not participate, to intimidate, and also coming ready for a fight. The fact that even our National Lawyers Guild guy picked up on the fact that they might be dangerous. I think that things with them could have turned out really badly if it weren't for the guns, but I think it's pretty obvious who they were. And it was a friendly conversation with the police. They had pulled by, at this point, like 45 minutes earlier. So either they circled around in the area and the police pulled them over, possibly, or they flagged them down, or they were working together the whole time. And again, they were there 45 minutes before I saw them, so I think they were sitting and talking with the cops for a while. And that just shows you who the police are, especially here. There's so much jaw-dropping stuff that I've shown you already, but this really doesn't take the cake. There's some egregious violations, but this is one of those things, like, we have evidence of it from the Black Lives Matter stuff.
Really enforce the citywide curfew shutdown so we can arrest anybody who's walking around. Okay. My command wanted me to come talk to you guys and request that you guys secrete either inside the business or in your vehicle somewhere where it's not a violation. I don't think so we don't look like we're playing favorites. Gotcha. We can go interior.
But there's not a lot. There's probably is a lot. I've just only seen a little bit. Compared to other police brutality and stuff, which you can find slews of, there's only so much police interacting with white supremacists. And I think finding that is pretty wild. That I witnessed it and saw it firsthand. This is real. Now, you can make the case all you want that I don't know that they're skinheads, I don't know that they're racist, and I don't know the nature of their interaction with the police. Yeah, sure. But, what makes sense? What makes sense to you? Because I know what makes sense to me. I'm going to leave you with some more of the live footage, which is a call to action, which tells you some of the things that you can do. And if you want to learn more, if you want to see more of the live streams, I'm going to provide links for those. If you want to see more from the guy that I interviewed, I'll provide links for those. But do what you can. And what I like about the call to action is that it's universal. You can do it from anywhere. It is the good kind of internet activism instead of like, oh, let's make a hashtag trend. No, this is more serious than that. It's a way that, even though you weren't here, that I was able to bring something back to you to where you can have, in some ways, as meaningful of an impact as I did. Even though I put so much more into this than you just watching what's probably a pretty long video at this point. So, after all of this, I just want to say, whatever you do, stay safe. And I'll see you in the next video.
And what I need you to do. So it's a couple of things, and then we're going to have someone come up and talk about the census, because that's really important. But you know, that you can file a complaint. Who got an email? Raise your hand, you got an email. You can go to the American Medical Association and file a complaint against this Dr. Amin. And the more people get in a complaint, not sending it just an email, but file an actual complaint, that he can lose his license. The American Medical Association, and we'll make sure on the Facebook event page that you have a link where you can just click on the link. It's gonna be real simple. Oh, that sounds real casual.
Just one more thing before I roll credits on this. I recently became aware of the No Comrades Under 1K sub, and I would just like to throw up on the screen some comrades that I'm subscribed to that have not yet reached 1,000 subs, but I really feel like they deserve it. So check these channels out, like their videos, give them a subscription, do what you can to help them out, share them on Facebook, whatever social media platforms you happen to be on, and let's try to build a stronger community together. I'm Jackie Fox, and my content will always be ad-free because I'm eschewing corporate donations to the channel. I just ask that if you can donate a little bit of money on Patreon like these fine, foxy folks, or if you want to make a one-time donation, you can donate on Ko-fi. If you're looking for another way to support the channel, I'm also making Fox hats with my logo on them. They are currently in the design phase, and I'm willing to allow people to ask for customized hats. Prices may vary depending on the cost of labor to manufacture them, because I want to make sure that my workers are paid fairly.